Welcome into another episode of Always Talking Ball, and boy, do we have a jam-packed show for you guys tonight. This was a fun one for us. Again, I'm your host, Tyler Noe. With me, as always, is Lance Barton. Follow us, as always, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Most importantly, we're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Please click that subscribe button. That helps us out. Man, Lance, we got a great interview for everybody tonight. Kelley Ford at KFord Ratings joins us. Everybody knows I'm a metrics guy. I love the numbers. I know a lot of listeners love looking into the power ratings and everything. Lance, I know you are a Mr. Eyeballs guy. I want to watch the games for yourself and make the conclusions for yourself. But, man, this was eye-opening, right?
Yeah, it really was, man. I mean, was excited to have him on just to hear how Kelley's, like his power ratings, how it goes, because it seems like it is like kind of lockstep with the Vegas numbers and power ratings as far as win totals and lines on games and stuff, and really seen a lot of Kelley's just information on X and on websites and people sharing it. Heard him on some episodes with VSIN, and the dude's sharp, man, knows his stuff. So I'm really excited that we've got him on here to talk to him and pick his brain about the greatest sport on the planet, college football.
Okay, well, without further ado, here's our interview with Kelley Ford. All right, let's welcome in our guest. You guys know me. I am a metrics and power ratings nerd, but I don't nearly understand enough of how these ratings and algorithms are created, which is why we have Mr. Kelley Ford joining us on the episode. You can find him on X at KFord Ratings, and most importantly, on his website, KFordRatings.com. This is an important episode for me because, I'm a metrics nerd. Lance here, he makes fun of me all the time. He doesn't like it. He likes to watch the games with his eyeballs and make judgments there, which is fine. But this is an episode for us to convince him and every other listener out there, why these things are so useful. So let's just get right into it. First, just tell us a little bit about how you got into power ratings and what all goes into creating the KFord ratings.
Yeah, for sure, Tyler. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And Lance, not the biggest power rating or metric fan. Hey, listen, guys, I say this all the time. I'm going to get to your question, Tyler, but the model, the power ratings, they're not the end-all, be-all. They are one data point. They're one piece of information that we can use to get a better understanding of any team, conference race, or the sport as a whole as we charge towards the national championship at the end of the year. So, of course, I believe in the power ratings. I believe in my own, obviously, but I know that every model, including my own, has blind spots. There are weaknesses. There are things that we miss on. There's outliers. So we'll get into all of that. But, Lance, no hard feelings. Maybe at the end of this, you'll feel a little better about it. But my goal is to produce information that is easy to understand and relatable for a lot of people. So the KFord ratings, though, started, publicly 5 or 6 years ago now. And it's really just kind of the mesh point of two really big hobbies of mine or skill sets of mine. College football, it's my favorite sport, always has been for as long as I can remember, probably always will be. And then math and science, I'm very strong in that area, kind of always have been. My undergrad degree is in mechanical engineering, so I'm not a practicing engineer, but all of those skills that were picked up along the way have certainly helped me in this hobby space. And then what goes into the power ratings? In the preseason, we've got three main components. You're looking at your returning production, and that is first and foremost. That is most heavily weighted. It's what are you bringing back from last year's team? What are you adding via the transfer portal? And of course, we are modifying, that production. Is the player that's coming to your team coming from a lower level of competition, a higher level of competition? So we're trying to account for that, of course. And then also the transfers out. So you're losing that piece as well. Then the second piece is what's your recent KFord rating history? So in the last 2, 3, 4 years, how has your program performed in my model? Not your win-loss record, but how has your program looked from a power rating standpoint? How strong has it been with the play on the field? And then finally, how well have you recruited in the last 2, 3, 4 years? Most heavily weighted, most recent years. But guys, this summer in particular, and in recent years, but this summer in particular, I've really reevaluated the weights of those three inputs, because how you build a roster in college football in 2024 is drastically different than how you built a roster even 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? So constantly evaluating, are these the right inputs? What's the right weighting of these? And then once we get into the season, we phase out that preseason component and we replace it with the much more informative in-season data. And guys, by 3, 4 games into the year, we really know who a team is and who they aren't. So that's kind of, how I started the power ratings, why, what goes into them, and certainly looking forward to breaking down a handful of teams here with you guys today from that lens.
Absolutely, Kelley. Appreciate you sharing that with us. And I have to admit, Tyler here did turn me on to your ratings last year, and I've turned a few of my friends onto your ratings as well. I've got some buddies that are huge college basketball guys, and obviously they're Ken Pond, Bart Torvik, etc. on the metrics and the ratings and things like that, and college hoops. So when I turned them on to you, they were like, "Dude, I love this Kelley Ford guy." They were looking at all of your different things you've been putting out so far this offseason. So appreciate you sharing that. And like honestly, I want to kind of like touch on that a little more. So I know your ratings aren't like from like a sports gambling perspective, but we have a lot of listeners that like to obviously dabble in that world, and us as well. So Tyler and I talk about all the time. We were much better from a sports gambling perspective before this whole NIL and transfer portal world, like a couple of years ago. Can you kind of talk about a little bit, like as far as your ratings is concerned, how different, and kind of elaborate even more on that, how different they are now because of the transfer portal, and from like a sports gambling perspective, like how can the normal common bettor kind of use that to their advantage with your ratings?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, Lance, I appreciate the kind words. Tyler, thanks for turning Lance on to the ratings. And Lance, thanks for spreading the word amongst your friends. I really appreciate that. And it's been fun to see it kind of grow a little bit.
You earned it.
Well, I appreciate it, and big news for Torvik getting on the team sheets in NCAA for basketball. So that's exciting. But yeah, a lot of people want to use power ratings, my model, other models, an aggregate of them for gambling purposes, for sports wagering purposes, and I totally get that. Like you said, it's not really my area of interest. However, my model can be used for that, and based on, actually in-person conversations as well as DMs, people are using it for that and having a good amount of success, which is great. I mean, I'm excited about that, and that means the model's working, and it's a good predictive indicator. So, yes, it has gotten more difficult in the transfer portal era to generate power ratings and to generate them with the same level of confidence that we had pre the heavy usage of the portal. I talked about how I've changed the weights of my preseason components. Well, that's part of this conversation because how we build the roster, like I said, is more intensive through the portal for most teams. Dabo hasn't adopted it yet, and we'll see if that strategy ultimately pays off, or if he needs to be dipping his toes more into that world. But it's hard to put my finger on exactly what the difference is now compared to before, because it's affecting every team almost, again, minus Clemson maybe, and it's affecting them at various levels. So we learned a lot from from USC in 2022. Lincoln Riley's first year at USC, really overhauled the roster. It was the biggest roster turnover in 1 year that we've seen, at least in my data collection time. And then Dion last year at Colorado in his first year did the same thing. Dion at Colorado again coming into 2024 kind of did the same thing. So we're getting data points on what that looks like for teams that are turning over their roster at this rate, and that's certainly helping us learn, helping the model learn how to deal with this from a confidence standpoint. It's not shaken too much, because if I look at my absolute error from last year compared to my absolute error from previous years, but that's really my primary target metric, if you will, and I compare that to the other benchmarks that are in the space, it wasn't any significantly worse last year than it was in any previous year. So I think overall the model's adjusting pretty well. And again, you're trying to play the game against Vegas in the sports betting world. So you're not necessarily even trying to get every single game right. You're trying to be on the right side of the Vegas line. And so as long as you're learning at a relatively similar clip to Vegas, because this is all new for them too, then you're going to be okay. And so that's kind of where I've been. But yeah, using my power ratings, you can look on the power tab of the website, KFordRatings.com/power. I think it's the first tab. You can see the power rating, and that's on a football points per game scale above or below FBS average. Just look at those two ratings, subtract them from one another. That's going to give you the hypothetical spread, at least according to my model, on a neutral field, and then apply whatever home field advantage you feel is appropriate. I have my own home field advantage numbers that I don't publish publicly. This is the first year I've moved to a program-specific home field advantage. So in the past, I'd applied a blanket, 2.2, 2.3, 2.5, whatever it was for everybody. Well, we have enough data now, and I've done enough back testing that I feel comfortable applying the home field advantage to specific venues. So I'm not posting my projected lines, but you can derive pretty much what those are from the power tab. And so it's a new world. Everyone's trying to deal with it. And as long as you can deal with it, better than most, you're going to come out okay. And that's fortunately where I found myself, going to continue to work towards that goal.
Yeah, so speaking of home field advantage, I mean, college football, there's so many different external factors that I feel like that affect games and outcomes of games. And I'm just curious, like for example, you just mentioned like home field advantage. Home field in college football, college basketball, college sports in general is such a huge deal, more so than any other sport, in my opinion, because of the overall, just the passion, these 100,000 seat stadiums that you've got going in there. And I'm just curious, so if like home field advantage, like for instance, Notre Dame, they open the season on the road at Texas A&M at Kyle Field. Like, do you factor in things like the time of the day? The time of the day that the game is played. Like, obviously, a night game in Baton Rouge or a night game at Kyle Field is a lot different than playing at 11 a.m. Do you factor in, like, a team playing in revenge, it being a rivalry game, or it being even like a themed game, like a Penn State whiteout, for example? Like, do you factor in external factors like that into your ratings and numbers?
I'm so glad I gave the disclaimer right off the top about no model's perfect, it can't capture everything. Like, the short answer is no to all of those things. I was excited this year to have the variable home field. On my wish list moving forward is to continue to do work on time of day, weather, the stakes of the game, right? Is it a rivalry game? What's on the line? Is a playoff spot on the line, a spot in the conference championship game? Like, all of these things, because like you said, Bryant-Denny has a different home field when LSU comes than when South Alabama comes, right? So it's different based on a lot of factors. We know that as fans of the game and as people who generate power ratings. I have not programmed into the model that type of logic, really for no other reason than I haven't had the time to collect all the data that I need and then backtest it at a level that I feel comfortable incorporating into a model that to this point has performed pretty well relative to the expectations and the other benchmarks that I have out there. So I don't put anything into the model if I'm not comfortable from a backtesting standpoint and in a significant sample size standpoint. I haven't checked those boxes just yet for all of those things, and that is why they aren't in there. But you're absolutely right. That would lead to undoubtedly that would lead to at least a minimal increase in accuracy for those specific types of games. Haven't gotten there yet, want to. There's other things like scheduling dynamics, right? And that's going to become more important as conferences continue to grow. So you've got teams from the West Coast playing teams from the East Coast on a more regular basis now in conference games. So, those mileage, that mileage that they have, the travel that they're doing. Was the team they're playing on a bye last week? Were they playing an FCS team? Were they on the road last week? There's all sorts of things that I just sum as scheduling dynamics. Those are not incorporated into the model either. Again, working on that, hope to get there, but those are just two examples of things where the model currently does not account for what we know are important factors in college football or just in sports in general.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some conferences here. Let's start with the ACC. You've got Florida State and Clemson at the top of your projections, but let's just discuss a few other teams that are pretty intriguing going into the season. I want to start with SMU. We saw multiple teams go from the G5 to the Big 12 last year and perform, pretty subpar. What do your numbers project for the Ponies heading into year one of the ACC?
So SMU was a good team last year, and we know they were in the American, and they're making the transition to Power 4. But the model, when I say good team, that's accounting for the competition face. Like we're adjusting for your level of opposition. So last year, SMU finished number 23 in my power ratings. That's pretty darn good for any team, let alone a team outside what was the Power 5. This year, I have them number 27. So taking a very slight step back. Offense should be about the same, maybe even slightly improve. I mean, it's a top 25 offense for me right now. It's the defense that might take a step back. They were 33 last year. I'm looking at number 39 this year. What's helping SMU in my projections is, one, they play in the ACC, which, as we know, is not the SEC, is not the Big Ten, is not maybe even the Big 12 in terms of depth. So they play in a conference that is more gettable, if you will, but also their schedule difficulty is number 66 out of 68 Power 4 teams. It's the third easiest schedule when you look at all 12 games in totality of all Power 4 teams. So that's going to improve their projections from who are they playing on a week in, week out basis. So I've got SMU looking at 9-3 is the most likely. We got a 29% chance to win 10 plus games. So SMU should feel good. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough going from the American, and it was a weakened American, right? Because like you said, 2 years ago, Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, some of these best teams that were in the American, they left. And so last year, the American was down even relative to its recent history. And SMU did perform well. They're going to have a step up in competition, but it's actually going to be eased into that if you're using my numbers as a gauge of schedule difficulty.
Hey, if you're at home listening right now and you like to, again, dabble in the sports betting world, SMU's win total is at 8. You heard Kelley just say, the percentages of 9 wins, possibly 10 wins. It's sitting on that key number at 8 that's a big deal. And it not being 8.5 or anything like that, sitting at 8 is a big deal. So let's move on to another team here in the ACC and talk about one of the most polarizing teams, it seems like, this offseason, and a team that gets hyped up every single year, and that is the Canes down at Miami, Mario Cristobal squad. And I'm just going to be honest with you, Kelley. I have said many times on this podcast that now that Jimbo is gone, there is not another coach out there in the entire country, in my opinion, that does less with more. Cristobal recruits his butt off. There's no doubt about it. The talent that is in South Beach this year at Miami is incredible. So Miami's win total set at 9. I'm just curious what your numbers say about the Canes this year.
9's about right. I agree with just about everything you just said, Lance, from Cristobal talent acquisition, and then also how does that translate to on-field success. Some of the biggest head-scratching decisions we've seen, last year with that game in South Florida. People reminded me at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just saw that. They reminded me a very similar thing actually happened when he was at Oregon, which I had forgotten. Yes. So I'm like, oh man, you've done this twice. That's not good. So I have real concerns there, but you're right. As the model's looking at the talent of this team, this could be the best Miami team since 2016, maybe, from a pure talent standpoint. I've got the number 17. I think the number's right on at 9. The 9-3 is most likely for me. 57% chance to reach at least 9 regular season wins. I think if this team wants to talk playoff in terms of an at-large bid, I think they need to get to 10 to be in that conversation. So there's a 29% chance that they get there for me. But this is a top 20 team, like I said, number 17, 21 on offense. So that's an improvement from last year. 36 on defense is what I'm projecting. That's an improvement from last year. And then again, from a schedule difficulty standpoint, there's a common theme here in the ACC because it is the weakest or one of the weakest power conferences. They're number 47 out of 68. So certainly a stronger schedule than SMU, but again, relative to the rest of Power 4 football, it's actually, pretty manageable. If I look at their game by game, there's only 3 games this year that my numbers currently make Miami an underdog, meaning less than a 50% win expectancy. Week 1, right out of the gate, it's going to be a great game, really exciting game, I think. 47% chance at Florida. Week 8, coming off of an off week, it's important to note there, 42% chance on the road at Louisville. And then the following week, probably the one that most Canes fans have circled, a 41% chance to win at home against Florida State. So only 3 games under 50, all of them at least 41% chance to win. So, I mean, it's not, there's a 1% chance that Miami is going to go 12-0 by my numbers in the regular season. So you're not calling for that. But if you look at any single game, you can absolutely make a case. Yeah, Miami has a path to victory in this one. So that's what Canes fans should want to hear, I think. I think it's going to be a good team. Probably need to get to 10 for an at-large bid. But there is a chance this team could find themselves in the ACC championship game. They're projecting right now number 4 for me in the ACC standings behind Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville. But only about a half game behind Florida State and Clemson right there for the favorites to make it to Charlotte.
All right, the next team I want to talk about is pretty much my entire family. I'm born and raised in the state of Alabama, but my entire family is pretty much from the Blacksburg, Virginia area. So I want to talk about the Hokies at Virginia Tech. And Brent Pry has, in my opinion, one of the best rosters that he's had in a while. One of the most, as far as rosters, returning production. Overall, Virginia Tech has a lot of returning production on this team. Quarterback Kyron Drones. Virginia Tech's win total is set at 8.5 this year. I'm just curious what your model says about the Hokies and Brent Pry this year.
8.5. I've got a 35% chance to win at least 9. I do have 8 and 4 as the most likely, so I guess the model would lean slightly to the under there. This schedule, number 65 out of 68, so right up there among the top 4 or 5 easiest schedules of any Power 4 teams. We talked about Miami in the games that they had in which they were going to be a projected underdog. Same thing here with Virginia Tech. Actually, even better. There's only 2 games on the schedule that the Hokies are currently projecting as an underdog. Now, they're a little bit bigger of an underdog than Miami. It's week 5 at Miami. It's a Friday night game, so keep that in mind too. 30% chance to win that one. And then week 11, Virginia Tech welcomes Clemson to town. 32% chance to win that one. You've got 2 other games that are in the 50s in terms of win expectancy. You got 2 more that are in the 60s, a handful in the 70s. That's how you get to that 8 and 4 projection. Virginia Tech, because of the schedule, I think 11 wins might be required to be in that at-large conversation. And certainly if they've won 11 games, you have to think they're going to be playing in Charlotte, or if they're not, they lost on some crazy tiebreaker. So I think, Virginia Tech's path to the playoff, probably pretty slim, but the schedule's out there to be had. And this is the best Virginia Tech team by my number since 2020. If you want to take that year out because it was the COVID year, some people like to throw it out. I leave it in there, but there is context. Like, it was a weird year. We need to remember that. If you take out the COVID year, this is the best Virginia Tech team, at least projecting, since 2017. They should be better on both offense and defense, and this special teams, as it has been most years down there, is projecting right now to be top 10.
All right, let's move on to the Big 12. This has been dubbed America's Conference. It's the conference that could just produce some absolute chaos this year. We feel like there are just several teams that can make a run at the Big 12 championship this year because there doesn't seem to be a huge separation. We know Kansas State and Utah are at the top, but I mean, as many as 9 or 10 teams we could see, possibly winning that league. How do your numbers, point to, one team or another? How many teams you have you think could make a case?
Yeah, Tyler, I'm going to go with 10. I think there are 10 teams in this conference, and a conference of 16, that the model would suggest there is a path. So, and a different way to say that is, if you want to make a case for any of these 10 teams, I'll listen and say, yeah, I could see it. And then I'm also going to counter with, here's why they won't make it to Arlington this year. Because I think all of these teams have flaws. All of these teams have positives to them as well. That's what's going to make this conference so exciting, this race so exciting. There's going to be so many close games in this conference that every single week I feel like we're going to be on a knife's edge, and it's going to flow one way or the other. And that's going to make some teams have a season that's going to greatly exceed their expectations, and others are going to fall short by a significant margin. It's going to boil down to, more so in this conference than any other, because a lot of teams can say this, what is your record in one-score games? Like, that is what it's going to boil down to in this conference. And I think the two teams that are able to have the best record in close games at the end of this year are likely to be the two teams from this conference who are playing in Arlington. For me, I'm looking at Kansas State and Utah as the two most likely to make the champ game. 6.5 projected conference wins. Again, a 9-game slate in the Big 12. 6.5 for Kansas State, 6.4 for Utah. Then there's a little bit of a drop. So those are my two favorites. Kansas, Arizona, Oklahoma State, all at 5.6 projected conference wins. UCF, 5.2. TCU 5.1, Texas Tech 5.0, and then a couple at 4.7, Iowa State and West Virginia. That's kind of where I draw the line. Notice I did not say Colorado, despite all the media hype, top 25 in EA Sports college football game. I have them as a greatly improved team, a team that I think might go 6-6, which should be celebrated. Unfortunately for Colorado, I think the expectations have been set unrealistically high, and if they go 6-6, people will view it as a disappointment. I don't think they should. I think that should be a good year and signs that Deion's making progress. I've got Colorado just outside the cut line, 3.8 projected conference wins. Last year I called for 3-9. I believe Colorado went 4-8. I was feeling a little bit nervous when they got off to that start, and I was like, oh man, maybe I swung and missed here, but they kind of regressed to where we thought they might be. Deion's still improving with that Colorado team, but certainly I don't believe at this point, based on the model, going to be a player in what should be a very, very deep Big 12 race to Arlington.
Yeah, we're definitely with you on that, and think that obviously Colorado's skill is legit, but I just line of scrimmage play, defense, all that, I'm just not sure. A team though that one of your newbies last year, that probably of the newbies that did the best was UCF, and they competed in games that they also didn't win in. They beat the brakes off of Oklahoma State when they came down to the bounce house. They went to Norman, played Oklahoma off their feet. So Malzahn's squad down there in Orlando, they kind of outperformed the other newbies in the Big 12 last year. They got a squad this year, especially in the backfield with KJ Jefferson at QB and RJ Harvey being back, getting Penny Boone transfer from Toledo, who transferred from Louisville, then transferred to UCF. So I'm just curious what your numbers say about UCF this year and Gus Malzahn.
Yeah, so UCF from 2017 to 2020 was a top 20 team in my power ratings. The offense was top 15. The defense a little bit worse. They had one top 20 year. Outside of that, though, they were outside the top 50. But on offense, they were really humming. This could be the best UCF team since that 2020 year that kind of ended that run of top 20 years. I've got them number 33. The offense, number 44, so that might be a little bit of a step back from last year. Again, we'll see how KJ Jefferson does, as you said. I am a believer in KJ Jefferson, so the model might be a little bit lower than I would have expected on that offense for UCF this year. The defense hovering right around that number 50, that seems to be the sweet spot for this program in recent years. UCF is a little bit of a sleeper team here, though, for a couple reasons. Number 56 in schedule difficulty, again, out of 68, so they're top 12, 13 easiest schedules out of Power 4 teams. If you look at just the conference schedule difficulty, though, because that's what's going to matter when it comes to determining who's going to Arlington, it's number 13 out of 16. So it's the fourth easiest conference schedule. They avoid Kansas State. They avoid Oklahoma State. They avoid Kansas, Texas Tech, some of these teams that are projecting to be in that race. So by avoiding those teams, you're giving yourselves a good chance here. They get Utah at home. I think that's important to end the year. Who knows what's going to be on the line in that one. 7 or 8 wins. It's a 25% chance to win 7, 25% chance to win 8. So equally likely there. You know, you got a 50% chance, 49% chance to win at least 8 games for UCF. Given the schedule that they're playing, I think 11 wins would be required to be in the at-large conversation for the CFP. And again, like we talked about with who was that, Virginia Tech, if you're going to reach 11, I think you're going to be in the champ game and your path's going to be the AQ either way. So I do think this team has a chance. I think the schedule sets up in a relatively nice way compared to some other contenders, and they would maybe be the dark horse team if I had to pick one out of that pack that's not Kansas State or Utah to make it to Arlington.
Well, a team that I want to touch on now is one that just seems like every year this bunch gets disrespected. Last year, Tyler and I both got to the window with their over win total. I think their win total last year, wasn't it, Tyler, like 6.5?
6.5, yep.
6.5. That's Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy. They played in the Big 12 championship game last year. They have, like I saw Phil Steele's magazine, I think had like Oklahoma State like with the most returning production of any team in the country this year for a team that did play in the Big 12 championship game last year. Now their win total set at 8. And when everybody talks about this conference of chaos in the Big 12, Oklahoma State hardly gets mentioned. So I'm just curious where your numbers are on the Pokes and Mike Gundy.
8 wins is exactly what my model is projecting. 8.0 average projected wins. 64% chance to reach at least that threshold, though. So you feel good about at least pushing that if you're taking the over is what I would say. Mike Gundy, I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in college football. I put out a graph, and this has maybe been a year or two now, and the things haven't changed too much, but I was surprised. It was like highest average KFord rating for programs in the CFP era, and Oklahoma State was like number 11. And I was like, man, I don't think people really talk about Oklahoma State. And again, this was, a year or two ago, so they're still probably top 15. I'd have to go back and check. But I don't think people talk about Oklahoma State at a top 15 year in, year out national respect level. Like, I don't think they are. And Gundy's been there for forever. Like, this is his program. He's run it. He's obviously one of their favorite sons, having come through the program. So I think Mike Gundy is a really good coach. I think he gets a lot out of what he has there in Stillwater. I think he knows how to recruit the type of player that's going to work in that system and that's going to thrive in that community. So I have nothing but positive things to say from a model standpoint about Oklahoma State. If you look at their schedule this year, I'm looking at 2 games only in which they're a projected underdog, at Kansas State in week 5. That's going to be a big one. And that's coming off of a week 4 game at home against Utah. This Oklahoma State team in back-to-back weeks plays the 2 conference favorites by my model. Week 4 at home against Utah, week 5 at Kansas State, 32% win expectancy on the road at Kansas State. And then in week 11, they go to TCU, 45% chance to win that one by my numbers. I mean, if you're looking at scheduling dynamics, though, which again, these win expectancies are not, Oklahoma State, you're not going to overlook anybody, and you shouldn't, especially in this conference. But let's look at the games in front of that TCU one. You've got an off week in week 7. Week 8 on a Friday night, you go to BYU. So that could be tricky. But from a pure talent standpoint, you're going to like Oklahoma State's chances. You follow that up with another road game. You never like going back-to-back on the road. But if you're going to do it, maybe these 2 teams are right. At BYU, at Baylor, then you're home to Arizona State. I mean, you're looking at some of the bottom projected teams right there in the 3 weeks leading up to what might be a really difficult test at TCU. So are you spending any time, game planning for TCU in there? It's dangerous, I know, but from a fan standpoint, as you're evaluating it holistically, that trip to TCU, you might have an upper hand in terms of game planning if you've been able to dig into that a little earlier. So those are the only 2 games, though, that right now my numbers make Oklahoma State a projected underdog, but 8-4 is the most likely record by my model. This Oklahoma State team, given the schedule, again, we're looking at 11 wins required, so it's probably a AQ or bust for Oklahoma State this year into the playoff.
Yeah. Before we get to the big dogs, the Power 2 conference tier, let's give the G5 a little love here, because one team is going to get in this college football playoff guaranteed from the G5, whether you like it or not. We've got Boise State, we've got Memphis, we've got my alma mater, Liberty, kind of as the favorites there. Obviously, Liberty has, without even looking, probably the easiest schedule of those bunches, and one of the easiest schedules in the entire FBS. What do your numbers say? Who do you give the best chance to try to get that G5 AQ bid?
So right now, my numbers would lean towards Boise State. And what I've done is included on my college football playoff projection graphic that's up on the website, KFordRatings.com. I've included, based on if the season played out per my power rating simulation, I've included kind of what every G5 champion, who they would be, and what their most deserving ranking would be. I have Boise State number 38 in the most deserving rankings. That would be the best of the G5, though. Again, if it played out this way and all of these contenders had multiple losses, it might not. We might get one team out of the G5 that goes on a run, wins all their close games, and ends up being, a one-loss or undefeated champion. Certainly, they'd be much higher and most deserving than number 38, and they would be the team from the G5 ranks that would get in. So I have a slight lean towards Boise right now, but UTSA is number 39. So I know, you said Memphis. I've got UTSA out of the American. Really a three-headed race in the American. If I go to that page really quickly, I've got UTSA projecting at 5.9 conference wins out of 8, Tulane 5.8, and Memphis 5.7. So it couldn't be any tighter between those three. Two of those three, I feel pretty confident are likely, at least one, but most likely two will be in the American Conference Championship game. That's at the site of the best conference record. So that's not a neutral site one. So getting the number 1 seed in that championship game could be really, really important come the end of the year. So I've got UTSA as right now the slight favorite coming out of there. Liberty there for you, Tyler, number 49. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and say it. It's the easiest schedule in all of college football by my numbers right now. It's 2 years in a row that Liberty has that. And last year, okay. This year, it's disappointing, honestly, if I'm a Liberty fan, because you have a team that can compete against a schedule that is much more difficult than the worst in all of FBS. So to me, your chances of going undefeated are pretty high. Give me 1 second, and I'll find what those are here. I've got Liberty, I've got Liberty with an 8% chance to go undefeated. The thing driving that down is a Week 5 game at App State. I've got a 46% chance to win that one, so almost 50-50. If you took that game out, what are your chances to go 11-1? 32%. So a 1 in 3 chance to win, if you take out App State, all of those games, most likely, and then 8% when you add in that App State game, essentially. Liberty, I think you could have challenged yourself a little bit more. Hey, I know schedules are done years in advance. I get all that, but man, you would have liked to see them be tested a little bit more. So those are the teams. James Madison out of the Sun Belt right now, number 51 for me. And then my MAC projected champion right now is Miami at number 79. So I think the G5 race to get that spot should be pretty exciting. Which one or ones of those teams can run through their schedule and have 0 or 1 losses, because really what we've seen from the committee so far is they put a high preference on minimizing the number in the loss column, which could work to Liberty's advantage here this year.
Amen.
What my numbers would suggest is that we need to be doing a little bit better job of accounting for the schedule difficulty faced, because it is possible that a team with 2 losses out of the Mountain West or the Sun Belt could have achieved more relative to what would be expected against that schedule than a Liberty team who has, 1 loss, let's say.
Or
so
like SMU last year.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's exactly right. We'll see if this committee approaches things differently. I'm not sure why they would. It's largely the same people with the same objective, right? They're just expanding the number that they're including in a playoff. So until they prove that they're open to considering the schedule and adjusting for the schedule difficulty faced, you've got to lean towards teams that are going to minimize the number in the loss column, and that could work to Liberty's advantage once again this year.
Yeah, it's all about the money, and it's all about fighting for that spot to whoever plays the loser in the SEC championship game, I guess. So
Yeah, and Kelley, we're definitely lockstep with you on that. With far as I wish there was right behind me this giant sign that said "Strength of Schedule Matters" is what it should say. So we're with you on that. But let's move on, as Tyler already alluded to the Big Two, the Power Two, to the Big Ten and the SEC. We'll start with the Big Ten. Obviously, Ohio State and Oregon right now definitely seem to be the prohibitive favorites at this point. I believe you have them in your top 2 as well. But I want to talk about the defending national champs, Michigan, though, because they are just oddly flying under the radar this summer. Obviously, I know, we all know they lost Harbaugh, multiple coaches. They lost a lot of talent to the NFL, but they've still got some dudes on that defense. They've got 3 projected first-round picks on that defense. They're still going to be mauling folks on the offensive side of the ball. We obviously don't know what they're going to be like at quarterback right now. That's obviously their biggest question. But FanDuel currently has the defending national champs Michigan win total set at 8.5. What do your numbers say about Big Blue?
It sounds crazy, but I have 8.6 average projected wins for Michigan. Now, you're always, these probabilities work to reach at least that threshold, you're always going to go higher than that. So I've got a 55% chance to win at least 9. So I think the over 8.5, there is some value there. The market's really down on Michigan. My model is down, relative to where this team has been in recent years. The last 3 years, they finished the year top 5 in my power ratings. This year I have them number 12, so that is a slight step back for Michigan. You said they got dudes on defense. I completely agree. This defense has been top 10 each of the last 3 years. I mean, if you go back to the CFP era, back to 2014, they've only been outside the top 22 on defense one time. That was the COVID year. Michigan certainly was hit hard that year. They were number 59. So kind of take that year out. Other than that, number 22 in 2014, that's the worst they've been outside of 2019 when they were number 13. So this has been, let's say, top 15 offense for almost every single year, non-COVID year of the CFP era. Defense. I've got the number 3 on the defensive side coming into this year, following up number 1 last year. It is the offense where you have the questions. Number 28, it's a step back from what we've seen each of the last 3 years. So we will see, how everything plays out. Lots of turnover on that side of the ball, on the coaching staff. There's just some questions right now. And the model would like to see how things go early in the year before making too big of a determination on Michigan. The good news for the Wolverines is they don't leave Ann Arbor until week 6. The bad news is included in those first 5 games. You've got Texas coming to town, who's a number 4 power rated team for me. You've also got USC, who's number 20. So, maybe not on the same level of Texas, but USC as a member of the BigTen, going to the big house. There's just going to be some extra around that game. I think both sides are going to be pretty hyped up. If you go down the Michigan schedule, there's 3 games that I currently make the Wolverines an underdog. I already talked about week 2 at Texas. That's when Texas comes, that's a 34% win expectancy. Week 10, Oregon comes to the big house. That's a 33% win expectancy. And then week 14 at Ohio State, 17% win expectancy. And I can already hear Michigan fans saying, yep, Kelley's saying it again, saying Ohio State's going to beat Michigan. For the record, last year, the time of the game, I did have Michigan as a favorite. Preseason, I did have Ohio State over Michigan. And each of the 2 years before that, I do believe the model had Ohio State to win those games. So the model, it's high on Ohio State. It got high on Michigan last year, right, as they continue to dominate. But it's back on Ohio State again this year. So Michigan fans are just going to look at that and say, okay, just chalk that one up to the model's going to miss it again. And we'll see. I mean, that's fair. 2 out of 3 years, that's fair. So we will see. But those are the 3 games that Michigan really has scheduled, I think. And really, those are the 3 biggest games. I talked about USC coming, a road trip to Washington. Maybe it could be a tricky one across the country. But it's really, Michigan's season could come down to what's the record in those 3 games. If they're 0-3, they've fallen short of their ambitions. If they're 1-2 or better, it's possible we're talking about Michigan back in the playoff again. Like right now, my model does expect Michigan at 9-3 to be in the playoff conversation there. And I actually have them number 10 in my projected bracket with a 9-3 record. Again, that's assuming all these other teams have the number of losses that we're projecting, which of course it's not going to play out that way. But Michigan's going to be interesting this year just with all the turnover they had, both on the field and on the sideline.
Something you said about Michigan really just intrigues me. So, I mean, we've got them an 8.5 win total, or DraftKings or FanDuel, whoever does. And you've got them at 8.6. And so I've heard from various sources, various shows I listen to on VSiN and whatnot. College basketball, like the Vegas lines will look at Ken Palm's rankings and everything. And, you and Bill Connolly, S&P Plus, all that stuff. How in lockstep do you think Vegas lines are with you guys and everyone who does power ratings out there? Is it the chicken after the egg? Do they look at your guys' ratings and base it off that, or how are they doing that?
I think, and this is, I think there's evidence that supports this at this point. There are books in Vegas that look at, I'll say Bill Connolly specifically, projections, and will use those to help inform their decisions. I'm not suggesting that they're just copy and pasting what he says, because sportsbooks have their own proprietary, or people that have their own numbers and do their own power ratings too, and that's literally their job. So I think that's happening too. But Bill Connolly, for one, has reached a level where his model, his numbers are so respected, just nationally, just across the board. It just doesn't matter who your team is, what conference you like, just regardless of other factors, just across the board, Bill Connolly has reached that level where Vegas does look at his and say, okay, we were thinking, 7.5. Bill's got this team predicting at 9 wins. Something's off. We need to look at this more and figure out where we are so off from this. And so I think that's certainly happening. I don't believe that my model has gotten to that level yet. Certainly, that would be the goal. Eventually one day to be a large enough presence that Vegas knows who I am and is looking at my stuff. But for now, I don't think that's the case. But I do believe Vegas odd makers, or I know Vegas odd makers. You mentioned Ken Palm in college basketball. Certainly, Bill Connolly in college football. They are looking at his. And really, guys, where it comes in is outside of the limelight, outside the Power 2, outside the Power 4. When you're looking at season win totals and prop bets and all these things for group of 5 level teams, like they're going to default more towards Bill, I think, because Bill's system is so robust and covers all of FBS, and just the general knowledge about those teams is lower than that, just in the public and also behind the scenes in Vegas, than that of the power teams that we're talking about on a daily basis during the season.
Okay. Back to football. I don't know about you. We are expecting big things from Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season. I mean, they're almost like, they feel like this year's version of Texas Tech from last year. They were getting a lot of offseason hype. Texas Tech, obviously, faced some injuries, kind of fell flat last year. What are your thoughts with a win total of Nebraska, 7.5? Do you think the hype is warranted? I could see them getting over that. I mean, their first 7 games before they get to that Ohio State game, you could see them being 7-0, right?
You certainly could. You said the win total 7.5. I've got 7-5 as the most likely, so I've got a 34% chance to reach at least 8 regular season wins. So I'd probably lean under, but you're absolutely right. You look at their first 7 games; they're a favorite in each of them. The closest to 50-50 is a 56% win expectancy at home against Colorado in week 2, and that's certainly going to have a lot of eyeballs on it after what happened last year. Then you get an off week in week 7. You finish that stretch of 7 games with a trip to Indiana. Then it gets really hard for Nebraska, and they've got, consecutively here, a road trip to Ohio State, UCLA at home. My numbers currently like the Huskers in that one. An off week, and then you close with a road trip to USC, home to Wisconsin, and then at Iowa on Friday after Thanksgiving, as always. It gets hard there. So if you're going to take the over 7.5, I mean, you almost, if they have anything less than 6 wins after their first 7, if they're less than 6-1, worse than 6-1 after the first 7, I think you're toast. And you really almost need to hope for 7-0, because you could make a case that each of those last 5 games is going to be really hard to win. Now, you're probably going to get one of those. So if you're 7-0, you are going to feel good about it. My numbers don't suggest that that's where it's going to play out. But I do, again, models don't account for everything, don't capture everything. I'm a believer in Matt Rule. I think what he did at Temple, what he did at Baylor, leave the NFL out of it, because that's a totally different game with totally different, rules in terms of how you build a roster, all of that. It's just different. So what he is attempting to build at Nebraska, we've seen proof of concept. And so I think he will eventually, whether it's this year or a year in the near future, get things rolling at a level that I think Nebraska fans should be happy with. Now, have Nebraska fans adjusted their expectations, right? Because you've run a couple coaches off in the last 20, 25 years who are consistently winning 9 or more games because that wasn't good enough for the Nebraska standard. And if that's your standard, that's your standard. I understand. However, I don't think this is the 70s anymore. I don't think it's the 90s anymore. I think Nebraska should reevaluate what is their expectation, because if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm thinking, okay, 8 wins, like let's expect to win 8. Every now and then we win 9, 10, push for a spot in Indianapolis, push for a spot in the playoff. But I don't believe the expectation in Nebraska anymore, from a realistic standpoint, should be to be competing for conference and national championships on a year-in, year-out basis. I wholeheartedly believe that Matt Rule can get Nebraska to a place where they're consistently winning 8 to 9 games. If not, a couple years here or there, getting to that 10-win mark, maybe even. But it's going to be hard in this Big Ten that continues to get more difficult as it grows and adds more strong teams. So I'm a believer. I think it can happen. I think this team's going to be improved from last year, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where they were quite dreadful. They were number 120 out of 133 teams last year. I'm still projecting sub 100, but a big improvement. The defense was great. They were number 6. I'm still projecting top 10. So we'll see if the offense can make strides there. And I know we've got an exciting quarterback coming in. Like, if we can make strides and Matt Rule can continue to progress as he has in other places, it is very possible that they could go over that 7.5. The model has to see it a little bit first. So I'd lean to the under there, looking at what the model's saying.
Okay, well, before we get talking, get Lance talking about the SEC here. I grew up in Indiana, and I was raised a Notre Dame football fan, so got to talk about my Irish. It feels like a historically soft schedule for Notre Dame. And obviously, the ACC scheduling agreement, and the weakest P4 conference probably has a lot to do with that. But it's still a talented team. Win total, set at 10 or 10.5, wherever you look. What's the percentage? What's the percentage to say the play is here? I mean, is over, under 10.5? What do you think?
10.5 sounds about right. As someone else who was born and raised and still lives in Indiana, Notre Dame is certainly, if you're a college football fan, a talking point on a daily or weekly basis. So this team, I mean, I think they're going to be really good. The schedule is, by Notre Dame standards, pretty gettable, if we're being honest. But 10.5 is about right. I'm projecting 10.2 regular season wins, a 43% chance to reach at least 11. So you're feeling good about your chances there, I think. And then if you look at the schedule, just game by game, Week 1 at Texas A&M, that might be the most difficult game on Notre Dame's schedule this year. It's a 50% win expectancy for me. Literally a 50-50 game right out of the gate. And Week 1 games are so funky because, one, the model doesn't know exactly what teams are yet. Like, it's the point in time in which we have the least amount of information at any point in the season during the year that we will have about a team. So, you have that to consider. You've had all summer to game plan for this game, to do different things. Now you add in Notre Dame quarterback having played for new Texas A&M head coach Mike Elko at Duke last year. Like, there's all these things going on that the model's like has no idea that this is what this player name matches up with that stat or that number in the model. This coach matches up with that coaching score, and now they're playing in totally new places. So there's a lot going on there the model doesn't see, but that is the only game right now that's a 50-50. Everything else, Notre Dame, every other game, Notre Dame has at least a 65% win expectancy. I mean, I see, only 3 games on the schedule with less than an 80% win expectancy. That would be Week 11 home against Florida State and Week 14 at USC are the only other 2, along with Texas A&M, that's less than an 80% win expectancy for the Irish. So yeah, it is a manageable schedule. It is one thing that we're not used to for Notre Dame. And because of that, to be an at-large, which of course Notre Dame has to be if they're going to make the playoff, there is no route to an AQ as an independent. My numbers right now suggest that Notre Dame would need to win 11 games to be in that conversation. Now, the reality is that a 10-2 Notre Dame, I don't believe would be left out of the playoff. I don't even have to see who the other contenders are and what their resumes are. I actually just think that the committee would put 10-2 Notre Dame in the playoff, even though this schedule this year is not the typical Notre Dame schedule. It's number 58 out of 68 Power 4 teams, so it's a top 10 or 11 easiest schedule in Power 4. The math suggests 11 would be required. I believe the reality is that 10. I do think it would be 10. I mean, unless there's a lot of carnage and we've got a lot of teams with 3 losses, I don't think 9-3 for Notre Dame this year is enough. Again, it could be based on the other teams that we're looking at. They might sneak in. In many years, a 9-3 Notre Dame would certainly have an argument based on the schedule they face, just not quite this year by my numbers.
Yeah, Tyler and I have had that exact discussion, Kelley, talking about Notre Dame in general, like that Week 1 matchup with Texas A&M. If they win that game, I mean, they would have to really work at it not to go at least 10-2. And we also agree with you. I think the committee's sitting there looking at 12 teams, and there's 10-2 Notre Dame. Like, I do not see them leaving them out. So we're with you on that. But let's go down to the SEC a little bit, Kelley. Where it just means more, my man. We've got to start with my alma mater. The Alabama Crimson Tide. The GOAT, Nick Saban, he's gone. And in is Kalen DeBoer. I'm just curious, do your ratings take into an account at all like a major coaching change like that? Because I personally believe, this could just be, the fan in me here, but I personally believe that odds makers have done just that by putting Alabama's win total at 9.5, which is the lowest we've seen in years. Like, I know Alabama's schedule is tougher than normal this year. I get it. Like, it really is, for sure. I think they've got, 5 teams on their schedule that are in Vegas is, top, 15, for as far as chance to win the national championship. But, I think if Nick Saban were still the coach, I'm just curious what their win total would be. So I'm curious what your model says in regards to a coaching change like this.
If Nick Saban was still the head coach, I don't think the win total would be 9.5. I think it would be higher than that. I'll just answer that right off the bat. Yep. Man, there were so many questions or lines of thinking there. I want to make sure I try to hit on all of them. So come back to me there if I miss some. No. It was all good. Yeah. I just have so many thoughts on Alabama now too that you've spurred. So if I miss something that you've asked at the end here, I'll come back to it. Just remind me. But the model does not account for coaching changes at a micro level. I do have coaching grades now, which I'm excited about, and I'm building out coordinator grades as well. However, as we talked about earlier on in the episode, I have not had the opportunity to back test to the level that I feel comfortable incorporating into the model. So that is not in there yet. What I will say is that it doesn't matter who you're bringing in. Following Nick Saban is a very hard task. He is I'll say arguably, even though I personally don't believe it's an argument, he is arguably the greatest college football coach of all time. To me, he is, and really stands out in a large way. I think what he did over the course of 15 years at Alabama, especially in today's day and age, in terms of the competitiveness of the landscape and what's, I don't think we will ever see that again. I could be wrong, but I don't believe in our lifetimes, at least, we will ever see a coach dominate at that level for that extended period of time. We will see, but that is what I think about Nick Saban, and so losing him obviously is a major blow. Now, the good news for Alabama fans is Kalen DeBoer has proven at every single stop, and it doesn't matter the level of resource, it doesn't matter the level of competition, all of that is irrelevant to Kalen DeBoer. He is a winner. That man just wins football games regardless of where he's been, and it'd be silly, I think, to suggest that that's just going to all of a sudden stop. Is it going to be very difficult to win at Alabama? Yes, absolutely, because you're playing in the SEC where it just means more, as you said, Lance. So, it's not going to be just easy for him to do that, but I don't think it's been easy for him at any level that he's been at, and he's found ways. So, my money's on him continuing to find ways to do it. Now, you said 9.5 is the win total. I've got a 46% chance to win 10 or more regular season games, and it's not because I don't think Alabama or the model doesn't think Alabama's going to be a good team. I've got the number 5 in the power ratings with the number 6 offense and the number 8 defense, also a top 10 special teams unit as things stand right now. They've had a lot of turnover. They're still loaded, and they're going to be really good, I think. I think people are discounting them too much. However, the schedule that they're facing is the 9th most difficult in the entire country. So you said all the teams that they have to play. They get Georgia, they go to Tennessee, Missouri comes to Tuscaloosa, at LSU, at Oklahoma, Auburn comes to T-Town in the Iron Bowl. So all of those teams I just said are top 25 power rated teams. And I didn't even touch on, South Carolina, who's a top 40 team, Wisconsin in the non-conference, Alabama going to Wisconsin. That's a pretty big deal, I would think, in a non-conference for Alabama. There's a 83% win expectancy for that, but a road trip to a top 35 power rated Big Ten team early in the season, so the weather hopefully wouldn't be an issue for Alabama at that time. But that's going to be a challenge for Alabama, I think. Really their first test of the season, if you look at the schedule, there's only one game that my numbers currently make Alabama an underdog. That is Week 5 against Georgia, who I have power rated number 1. Other games that are really close, I'll say in the 50% win expectancy range, 50 to 59, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Oklahoma. So 3 road games. Given the schedule Alabama's playing this year, my number suggests 9-3 would be good enough to be in that at-large conversation. And I think their chances to get at least 9 wins right now by my model, 75%. So when you're looking at, teams that have a good chance to make the playoff, Alabama for me right now is in that grouping of, I have Georgia with a 90+% chance to make the playoff, or excuse me, to be in the at-large conversation. It's not a playoff percentage. It's to be in the at-large conversation. And that's really right now the extent to which I'm comfortable doing, because I was really turned off last year after what happened to Florida State. I was like, they're in. There is no way that they're not in. And then they weren't in. So that really gives me pause to put out projected CFP chances. What I do feel good about is, what are your chances to be in that discussion for an at-large? Let alone what your chances are to win your conference to get the AQ. What about being an at-large? Georgia's 90+%, Ohio State and Oregon are 80+%. Then you got 3 teams, Alabama, Texas, and Penn State, who are all 70+%. So Alabama fans, hey, you don't have Nick Saban anymore. I don't think it's realistic for you to expect the next 15 years to be the same as this 15. However, I do think it's reasonable to expect that your team is still going to be very, very good. Your team is still going to be competing for spots in Atlanta. Your team is still going to be competing, certainly, at a minimum, for spots in the CFP. And then once you're in the dance, anything can happen. And I think Alabama's chances to win a title in the next 10, 15 years are still really high. You're probably not going to win 6, but you're gonna win 1, maybe even more. So it's still good to be an Alabama fan, even though Nick Saban's no longer there.
Yeah, I'm curious. And as Lance said, I keep up with your website and your ratings and everything. And I saw your version 1 of your power rankings. You had Alabama ahead of Texas. So what went into the decision in flipping that and putting Texas ahead of Alabama in volume 2 of the power rankings? I mean, it was probably a couple weeks, difference between it. So just kind of what went into that.
Yeah, so it's not the first time I've got that question. I do the way that I generate the power ratings. Again, we're talking about the 3 main inputs that I mentioned earlier. I the way I collect the data and the way it all gets incorporated, and then again, as everybody's data gets input into the model, and everything, the average resets, right? Because if you just change one team, the average is not going to change a lot. If you're changing all 134 teams, all the numbers are changing simultaneously, and water kind of has to refine its level. And when that happens, the relative strength of every team shifts a little bit. So Alabama was very slightly ahead of Texas. Now Texas, I would say very slightly. They're actually about 2 points ahead of Alabama. So that is a somewhat significant change there, I would say, especially at the top. Also, though, what I've said, it's just the timing of when all the information gets input into my model. I had the time to put it all in. I did make bigger strides from version 1 to version 2 this year than I have in years past. So the change from version 2, sometimes I even do a version 3 and then a final. I think this year, because of the amount of progress I made in version 2, I'm just going to go from version 2 to final in August. And things aren't going to change drastically, but they're going to be more slight tweaks. But the tweaks from version 2 to final this year are going to be less than version 2 to 3 or final in years past, because the 1 to 2 jump this year was greater than in years past. And so if we would have had a similar jump to a years past, maybe Texas still passes Alabama in version 2, but probably not by 2 points where they are now. So again, you're splitting hairs a little bit, and I always say nothing is final about my preseason model until mid-August, when I have everything in there, because people say, well, nothing really changed. Like, how do you have something different? Guys, trying to collect data for 134 FBS teams that have 85 plus players each, and in the transfer portal era, we're still in the COVID time, by the way, too, where people are using COVID years, they're not using COVID years. I'm a one-person show who's not getting paid to do this, so yeah, I do find things that I missed, things that I incorrectly guessed on, and so we do have some changes. At some point in the future, maybe the power ratings end up being more of a revenue generator for me. Maybe it's a full-time job. I don't know. Then people, and Tyler, I'm certainly not suggesting you were getting mad about this. You're asking a good question. But there are some people I don't understand how it's changing. Hey, guys, if I'm ever doing this full-time, you can expect that by, February or March, I'll have a really good handle on everything that's going on. And then, of course, the spring window will happen, and you'll have to redo it all again anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
But for the time being, I'm doing what I can, and things are changing in live time. But mid-August, we'll be there. Everything will be in, and we'll feel really good, and we'll go from there.
Good stuff, man. Well, we talked Alabama. We obviously got to go, head down the road a little bit down Highway 280 to the loveliest little village on the plains and talk about Hugh Freeze's Auburn Tigers. Old brother Hugh comes in and pretty much had to completely revamp I'm just going to call it a trash roster that Brian Harsin left him. Hugh's still trying to pick up the pieces from that roster. He's doing a really good job building that roster back up. I actually really like his skill position that he's got this year at the receiver position. 3 tailbacks, all 3 tailbacks are back. I'm just curious what your numbers say about Auburn and Hugh Freeze this year. Their win total is currently set at 7.5.
Set at 7.5. So right now I'm projecting 7.1 average wins. I've got a 39% chance to reach 8 or more. So I would lean slightly to the under there. 7 is the most likely record for me, a 31% chance to land right on that number. I agree with you that what Freeze is building is a positive and moving in the right direction. This team was as low as number 43 in my power ratings in 2022. That was their low point of the CFP era. Last year it jumped up to number 30, and this year we're projecting number 23. So the offenses last year is what held the team back a little bit. They were number 69 on that side of the ball. The defense was actually top 25. But the offense was 69. This year I'm projecting 48 on offense, so a 21 spot jump. That's pretty darn good. And on defense, maybe a slight regression right now, number 30. Still a good unit, though, and the better of the two if we're looking at the team holistically. It's the number 13 most difficult schedule in the country. You go down the roster, and, man, there's a lot of tough games for a team that I have in my top 25 power ratings. There's just a lot of games where you're looking at less than a 50% win expectancy. Week 5 against Oklahoma at home. Week 6 on the road at Georgia. Then you get an off week. Week 8 at Missouri. Week 9 at Kentucky is 49%, so right there at 50-50. Before, Vanderbilt, ULM, you would think those would be wins for Auburn. And then you close the year with some tough games too. Texas A&M at home and at Alabama in the Iron Bowl. There's so many games that you're going to be a projected underdog. Now, I think Hugh Freeze, they're going to win a couple of those games because he has proven when he was at Ole Miss, and he has proven he can win games in which he's a projected underdog in big time moments. He has also proven that he can that his teams will stub their toe at times when they're a projected favorite. So if we can minimize those and win all the games we're quote unquote supposed to, and then have a couple surprise upsets mixed in there. Who knows? I mean, I think 9-3 is what Auburn needs to be in the at-large conversation, given the schedule they face. I've got a 14% chance to win at least 9 games, so that's not nothing, but it's not great. Now, I don't think people in Auburn are, well, maybe they are, I don't know. I don't expect they're expecting a playoff appearance this year, but I do think the roster is being built in such a way that we could be talking about the expectation being a playoff appearance in the very near future, if not this year.
We talked about Texas a little bit with Alabama. Now we got to talk about the other newcomer in the SEC. It's first year in the conference, Oklahoma. The schedule makers did them no favors whatsoever. Certainly not the kind of favors that they seem to have thrown the Longhorns' way. What I find interesting and funny, and you can touch on this, you've got OU 8th in your overall power rankings, but 9th in the SEC conference projections, which is just, it speaks to the difficulty of their schedule in the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And I just want to touch on Texas there because this kind of happened last year, too, where Texas, last year in the Big 12, they kind of got a nice schedule. Oklahoma maybe didn't. Well, it just happened again. Texas, by my numbers, the number 16 schedule out of 16 when you look at just conference play. Just the 8 SEC games, Texas has the easiest conference slate of any team in the SEC by my numbers. You look at Oklahoma, it's the 3rd most difficult schedule when you look at just the 8 conference games. When you add in the non-conference games and look at that totality for everybody, there's not a non-conference game where you're like, oh, Oklahoma's, really going to get challenged here. Let me go down the list. Yeah, you got Maine out of the FCS in week 10. They open with Temple, Houston, Tulane, all at home. So none of those games, none of those 4, in and of themselves are difficult. However, when you look at their conference schedule, how difficult that is, loop in those extras, and then look at everybody's 12, it's still the 6th most difficult in the country by my numbers. That's how hard the 8 in-conference games are. And guys, they don't even have to play Georgia. They don't have to play Texas A&M. They don't have to play, Florida, who I have as a top 25 power rated team. So you're not playing the number 1 team in your conference in the country, and you still have the number 6 most difficult schedule in all of college football. So I'll finally get to the question here, Tyler, of, the number 8 power rated team, now they're number 9 in the power ratings. Or in the conference standings, they are number 8 for me. And that, if there was one team in my top 10 who said, okay, Kelley, separate Kelley Ford the person from KFord Ratings the model, what do you disagree with? I don't think Oklahoma is the number 8 team in the country. Like, that gives me pause. I understand from a model standpoint, when I look at all the inputs and I look at the relative strength of Oklahoma, projected strength, in comparison to all these other teams we're talking about, I understand why they are where they are in the model's view. However, in my own personal view, if I'm going Lance's approach and, watching the games and forming my own opinion, man, I have a hard time with Oklahoma being at number 8 ahead of teams like Ole Miss, Florida State, LSU, Michigan, Tennessee even. Like, all of these teams are like, man, I think maybe they're actually a better team than Oklahoma. Model has them 8th. Top 15 offense, top 15 defense. The games in which Oklahoma's projecting to be the biggest underdog or an underdog. Week 7, the Red River Shootout against Texas, 31%. Week 9 at Ole Miss, 42%. Week 11 at Missouri, 49%. And then to close the year, Alabama at home, 48%, and LSU on the road, 38%. So none of those games individually is Oklahoma projecting to be a huge underdog. But in each of those games, they're projecting to be an underdog. And so when you're multiplying together the win expectancies there, that's how you get to 8-4 as the most likely record. Just like we talked about with Alabama and Auburn, I think 9 wins here is probably, enough to put Oklahoma in that conversation for an at-large bid. I've got a 39% chance that happens. So Oklahoma's certainly among the teams that I expect to be in that college football playoff conversation if they can live up to the model's expectations for how good this team potentially could be.
Yeah, so Kelley, there's 3 teams that it seems like just everything you listen to, everything you read, Tyler and I talk about them too. There's 3 teams that seem like that even their win totals are right there together. I'm just curious what your numbers say in regards to Missouri, LSU, and Tennessee. Those 3 teams, again, seem to be very close to one another. I'm just curious, how close are your numbers with those 3 squads?
So I'm going to give you the power ratings first. I got LSU number 11, Tennessee number 13, Missouri number 15, so very close. Yeah. Projected SEC standings, LSU 5.2, Tennessee 5.0, Missouri 5.0. So let me go to their overall team projections here as I scroll. It'll be LSU first. I've got them with 8.7 projected conference, or 8.7 overall wins, 56% chance to win 9+. Tennessee at 8.7, 58% chance to win 9+. And Missouri 8.9, 63% chance to win 9+. Missouri's schedule is the easiest by far out of those three. Missouri has the easiest schedule in the SEC when you look at all 12 games. They're number 32 overall in schedule difficulty. They're the only SEC team outside the top 30. If you look at just the conference schedule, it's the second easiest behind only Texas, as we just talked about. So, I mean, Missouri, this is what I say about Missouri, because I think LSU and Tennessee are both a little bit more proven, I would say, at least in recent years. I know Missouri had a great year last year too, but LSU and Tennessee have been more in the national spotlight more recently than Missouri has. And no disrespect to Missouri, I know they went to a couple SEC championship games, their first couple of years in the SEC, back a decade or so ago. But Missouri, it's not every year that you're going to get a schedule in the SEC where you don't play Georgia, you don't play LSU, you don't play Tennessee, you don't play Texas, you don't play Ole Miss, and you don't play Florida. I think Kentucky is the only other team that I didn't mention there. Like, Missouri misses so many of the contenders for a spot in Atlanta, which means they're playing all the teams that we are not expecting to be contending for Atlanta. They're playing Vanderbilt. They're playing Mississippi State. They're playing Arkansas. They're playing South Carolina, right? They're playing all those teams. It's not going to be every year that Missouri has this type of schedule with this amount of talent on their roster. So I think this is the year that Missouri has to take advantage. And I think, based on my numbers right now, 10 wins is what would be required for at-large conversation, and I've got a 31% chance that happens. So if there's ever a year that Missouri is going to make the playoff, I do think it's this year, because they have the talent, which, again, I think Missouri fans think they're going to have this on a year-in-year-out basis, and they very well might. Like, what Eli's got going on there is really good, and the trajectory is going the right way. However, I'm not convinced that you're going to have this level every single year. You might, but it might be comparable, but I am convinced you're probably not going to have this type of schedule every single year moving forward. So I think Missouri really has to take advantage. LSU, Tennessee, of course, we're going to expect to be contending as well. But eyes are definitely on Missouri, and I think people look at it and say, Kelley, you only have number 15. That is a little bit lower than the national consensus because the model needs to see it, but because the schedule they play is what it is, they are certainly in that conversation, whereas I think LSU and Tennessee, a little bit better teams, but a little bit more difficult schedule too.
Okay, well, finally here, Kelley, we got to talk about the phenomenon known as SEC bias. I definitely get accused of being a little SEC bias. I know Tyler likes to accuse me of it, and some of the listening audience sometimes does as well. And then the media gets accused of SEC bias, et cetera. Your ratings have 5 SEC teams in your top 10 and 11 in your top 25. So are your ratings biased towards the SEC as well?
I mean, I think it's more likely that there is no bias that exists there, and these are just good teams, than it is my model is biased, right? Like, that's,
you don't say.
Like that's right. That's literally the definition of a mathematical model. In most instances, you're trying to remove biases. So that's what I'm working to achieve here. So you can never remove 100%. Like, I get that, but you're doing what you can to minimize it. I understand the rhetoric around it. And I understand people outside the SEC footprint being frustrated. And I do think there are members of the national media who certainly play into that. And I think they play off that. They thrive in that. They like to have fun with that sometimes when they're not even being serious. I think sometimes there is inherent bias in what some reports are that are out there. However, with that being said, I think a bigger reason here is jealousy. And you're talking to somebody who is born and raised in Indiana, went to a Big Ten institution, roots for a Big Ten team, and has never lived, with the exception of 2 years in graduate school, in Ohio, outside the state of Indiana. So, I've lived in the Midwest my whole life. I have no special affinity for any SEC team. Actually, I probably lean towards disliking many SEC teams more than I lean towards liking them. But again, the reason for that is because they're good, and they win, and they beat my team, and they beat my conference, and all these things, right? So I think it's more jealousy than anything. Guys, all in all, I don't think the SEC bias is real. I do think it's present, like it is a thing. But when it comes down to deservedness versus bias, I think the SEC, based on their play on the field, is more deserving of the praise they get than they're being given because of any bias that's out there. So I know you asked the question kind of half in jest, and I do think it's a worthy conversation, because come the end of the year, when we're evaluating, this is important, when we're evaluating 8, I'll say, for Florida, but I know it won't actually happen that way, but 8-win Florida, 9-win teams from the SEC, more likely, than 10-win teams from the Big 12 or the ACC.
Agreed.
It's going to be a good thought test for the committee of, are they just going to minimize the number in the loss column as they've done in the past, or are they actually going to evaluate the schedules that were played? Because I think a lot of people are assuming that, a Power 4 team went 10-2. You're going to get in over a Power 4 team that went 9-3. And the committee has kind of reacted that way or acted that way in the past. My challenge to them would be to really look to see how difficult was it to achieve those records because of the schedules faced. Because I think in my most deserving rankings, you're going to see a good number of 3-loss SEC teams, for example, ahead of 2-loss Power Conference teams, maybe even 1-loss Power Conference teams from the other conferences, depending on how that all shakes out. So I wouldn't call that bias. I would call that accounting for the talent that you faced, and then how difficult was it to achieve the record that you did relative to what would be expected if we looked at all schedules through a common lens, which is what my most deserving does.
Yeah, we agree with that 1,000%, Kelley. And we've talked about that a lot on the show, that college football fans are going to hopefully have to retrain their brains and how they look at, it's no longer going to be, well, this team must be Team A must be better than Team B just because Team A has less losses. It should be about who have you played, who have you beaten, all that type of stuff should be factored in.
Completely agree.
Guys, you can find him at KFord Ratings on X. Please visit his website, KFordRatings.com. Kelley, this was fascinating for us. We can't thank you enough for hopping on with us.
Yeah, thank you, Kelley.
Absolutely. Thank you both for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Man, how about that? Man, I do not want to fangirl over here, but man, that was some good stuff right there from Kelley Ford at KFord Ratings, KFordRatings.com. You guys got to go follow him on Twitter, look up his website. Lance, did that open your eyes at all?
Dude, that was seriously, that was incredible. Just first off, I mean, just like us, man, just loves college football, loves talking some ball. Obviously, he's very passionate about college football and using his just huge brain when it comes to mathematics and just statistics and applying those numbers and metrics. I have to admit, I definitely was impressed with just overall his knowledge of, it makes me respect him far more too, just his overall knowledge of the sport and every team. I respect the fact that it doesn't matter which team we bring up, which conference we bring up. I mean, dude knows ball. He's a ball knower. And that was awesome, man. That was eye-opening. I definitely hope we can have Kelley, we're going to make him say no. We're definitely going to try to have him back on.
Yeah.
Again, man, and the fact that dude lives not far down the road from you, I mean, that's what a small world.
Yeah. There's so many things we didn't get to either. I mean, his watchability stuff that he puts out for game ratings and everything. It's just all fascinating. So, yeah, we're definitely going to try to have Kelley on again. Again, his ratings are going to be so useful for the bettors out there who are looking at making some money this fall. Again, we're just weeks away from college football starting. So, again, we appreciate you guys listening. Click that subscribe button before you leave. Click the follow button. Go to socials. Follow us on there. We appreciate it. Send this message or this episode to friends. I guarantee everyone will get something out of this episode because that was just an awesome interview. So, again, Kelley, we appreciate you. Thank you. And until next time, guys, we'll see you later.